Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our continued Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and all of our episodes are over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to check us out on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. And I am joined tonight by my co-host Toni Reitter, calling in from the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. Toni, how's it going today?
Well, it was really beautiful while I was at work, and now we've got what looks like probably snow clouds. So it's getting a little bit colder, and March is just not wanting to let go of winter. So I guess even though Iditarod is starting to wrap up, we're not down on the Kenai.
Yes. Me and my wife, Michelle, did something that we absolutely love doing today. We headed down to Anchorage and did a school presentation about Iditarod to a group of kindergartners. And that is always, it is always so much fun. Lots of cool pictures. And I am just so surprised and I know that they cover it in school and all that. And of course, kindergartners aren't doing the math or anything, but I'm just so surprised how much those young kids know about mushing and the Iditarod, even at 6 or 7 years old.
Right? Yeah, it's so great. I can remember when I worked for Mitch, I would have the email going during Iditarod, and so you'd get all of these different grade school kids from kindergarten up asking questions, and they were just the cutest things ever. And sometimes I would answer them, and then there were some that were just too adorable, and I'd kick them over to Danny, and of course he'd go into his elaborate stories like he does on Facebook, and the kids would just eat it up. So I love school programs. I remember when Paul Gebhardt used to come into our different classes over the years and bring his dogs, and it keeps the sport and the idealism of Iditarod, I think, alive, even for Alaskan kids. We take it for granted up here.
Yeah, and just what they do in all of the schools, you know, in the older grades, as I mentioned, they really get in depth because you can cover a variety of subjects, whether it be history or math or reading or science or whatever. It seems like Iditarod is the perfect curriculum for schoolwork in, kind of in that dulls of winter and then early spring. And they do it all over the country, don't they?
They do it all over the country and all over the world. And I just want to brag about myself for a minute. I may never have been the Iditarod champion, but I was often the Didi Johnrow runner-up Iditarod. So I'm just saying, I was pretty awesome. I wasn't Dallas Stevie awesome, but I was like Didi Johnrow awesome.
hey, that's okay for sure. So let's talk about the race. We have a new champion. Brent Sass, Wild and Free Mushing, based out of a kennel up near Fairbanks, sort of the interior of Alaska. And I think his time was due. I remember starting to follow him about the time I moved up here to Alaska. And of course, I had a soft spot for his dog, Silver. And I saw his logo that he has is a depiction of that dog, and he immediately put on one of his hats when he arrived into Nome early this morning. I think it's his time. What do you think?
I think so, yeah. I mean, he really took the Iditarod by storm. His rookie season, he was 13th. He was poised to have some really high top finishes later on, and for one reason or another, things didn't go his way. I really have to commend him after his very, I think, humiliating finish in 2016 when his dogs quit on him in White Mountain. He spent, I think, over 24 hours trying to rest his dogs up enough to coax them into Nome. He did finally get them there. But he got a lot of flack from, I think, just about all of us who comment on the race at all. Fans, commentators, other mushers, saying that, he didn't just not manage his team well. He stopped running his race and he let ego get the best of him. And so he took a step back. He said he was going to reevaluate what he was doing, why he was doing it, that he agreed that, something was wrong, and that something was probably the musher. And so he took a step back, I think, for 3 years. He didn't do any racing. He built up his kennel. I think he built up his property. And he really just got back to the reason why he wanted to be a musher, which was to have that lifestyle, and let the races do what the races do. And he came back to the quest first, since that was his first love. And he started winning that again. He came back to Iditarod, and he did. He ran his own race. He didn't try to catch or pass Dallas Stevie early on just because Dallas was making the move that he was, or, even before Dallas, it was Thomas Warner and Pete Kaiser and all of that. And so now here we are 3 years later from basically the reboot of his program, and he's the Iditarod champion. And I think in a world that it is so easy to forget that, you have to do right by your dogs, and you have to not just worry about that finish line and that first place prize. It was so humbling and honest to see him really change his perspective and live up to that. It wasn't just lip service and a tattoo on his arm. He really, truly did run his race, and that he came in first was not necessarily surprising, but he never let that be his focus. And so he totally deserved this win. It was a well-run race, very impressive, and kudos to him.
Yeah, I really liked watching him, and I have to say this is the first time in all of these years that I've been doing this, and this is your second year, and Alex and I have been on it forever. This is the first time my prediction ever came true. I picked him to be my Iditarod champion. So maybe I should start playing that Iditarod fantasy or fantasy Iditarod or whatever it's called. And if there's money involved, I might win a few dollars. I don't know. But right now, Toni, it looks like Brent and Dallas are the only two teams into Nome. And then we have Jesse Holmes, Dan Caduce, Richie Dio, Pete Kaiser, Aaron Burmeister, Chad Stoddard, Ryan Reddington, and Aaron Peck, either in or out of safety or in or out of White Mountain. And as we mentioned over the last few episodes, the real story, I guess, because Brent and Dallas were there at the front for most of the race, way back well before Ruby, I believe. But the real story of this Iditarod is this pack of mushers here. But we have a quick story to talk about with Travis Beals and his lead dog. So start that off, and then I'll give a little bit of a musher's perspective.
Sure. So Travis Beals was actually running in the top 10 into White Mountain, and he was getting ready to leave this evening, and fans started watching where it was a scene that we've seen before, and it was even one that we saw Chad Stoddard deal with today, where the lead dog balked and didn't know what they were supposed to do, wanted to go back towards the hay or the straw bales, is my understanding. I didn't actually get to watch it live. And so then I believe it's Sarah, his partner, she posted on their kennel Facebook page that a little while ago he had to actually backtrack to White Mountain, that the lead dog that he had is a very young lead dog. I think this is her first Iditarod. He's had to send all of his veteran lead dogs home. And so it's very similar actually to the last time Sarah ran the Iditarod with a team of their young dogs. And she ended up being the lead dog all the way to Nome from, I think, safety. It might have been White Mountain, but I feel like it was from safety to Nome, to just get the team there. It wasn't that they didn't want to go. It's just they didn't know how to go or what was really required of them to go. So Travis is now sitting in White Mountain. And it's my understanding that not only is your race do or die by your lead dogs, but if your lead dog is lacking in confidence in themselves or in a musher, it's pretty hard to come back from that with that dog necessarily in this race. It might happen later on, but it's kind of a big deal when you don't have a leader in your team.
Yeah, in the movies, you often see this miraculous lead dog. It's typically one dog far out front, pulling the team with all of their wit and, just doing the job on their own. And in real life, that's hardly the case. I could probably count on both hands the times that there has been a single leader that has took a team all the way to Nome, and I'm sure you could probably correct me on that, but it's rather uncommon. Almost always nowadays, most teams are running double leaders, and they train that way from puppies. And often you will have a veteran dog bringing up the puppies and training the puppies on their own, and that's sort of how lead dog training is done. It's not a lot of musher type. I mean, you can't necessarily put it in the dog's mind that, hey, you're going to be a lead dog and I'm going to train you for it, like you would train a kid to be a quarterback or something like that. It's almost that natural or instinctual gift to be a very strong-headed dog. But in a perfect world, Toni, a musher wants to train as many dogs as possible in their team to be leaders so they can step up and fill that role. And the second position on a dog team is often called the point position or swing position. And often those are sort of like the backup quarterbacks in football. Those guys are ready to go if one of the dogs in front of them falters. They're sort of the next in line, so to speak, at least in our kennel and the way we've done it for 25 odd years. So those are the, sort of the backups. And then you have your third and fourth string leaders as you work your way back in the team. And hopefully as you work through Iditarod or any type of race, you use the dogs that can perform the best. And I know just a few minutes ago, Toni, you talked about Brent Sass having a really hard time getting his dogs to go in White Mountain. They just didn't want to budge. And that very well could have been a leader problem. I don't remember, but it's pretty common. If the lead dog doesn't want to go, none of the other dogs will probably want to go either. And it takes a fair amount of pushing them along, especially after you get however far these last checkpoints are when we're into the 800 miles. We always say dogs are going to be dogs and you can't force them to run. And I know that's a common a saying in dog sledding. You can't force the dogs to run. And this is a perfect example of that. If the dogs do not want to go, you cannot coax them to go. And I think that what we're seeing with Travis could be that case. And like you said, if it's a very young leader that doesn't have that confidence or doesn't have that strong co-leader by its side, it could be a real tough hoe to haul from that point forward. And I'm sure you know that we have seen many races just sort of disintegrate at these far checkpoints. And I know Alex has a favorite story about one of the mushers in safety that his dogs just didn't want to go. And he was 22 miles or however far safety is. So he just started walking, thinking, well, if I have to, I'm going to walk all the way to Nome and hopefully my dogs will follow. And that guy, I don't remember if it was a guy or a gal, just started doing it. And before too long, the dog said, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. I'm going to take off running. And I guess the musher caught the sled and the rest is history. But that's a pretty common story, isn't it?
It is. And we've heard several of them over the last few years. Like I said, Sarah Stokey, I think, is the latest story that we've heard. And I misspoke saying it was from safety. I think it was from that final mountain is when they decided to quit, which, to be fair, if I've gone 900 some odd miles, I don't want to hike up another hill either. So I'm totally understanding there. And she had a puppy team. So, getting them that far is an accomplishment in and of itself, but they were so close to Nome that I can totally understand why it was like, all right, guys, we don't have a lead dog, so let me be the lead dog. They followed her. It wasn't like they were being forced. Nobody wanted to go up and lead. And so, yeah, you see that. And you said earlier, that you don't normally see one dog in lead. We used to, like 30 years ago, that was
right.
very common. You'd hear about Granite with Susan Butcher or Andy with Rick Swenson, and it was always just one dog. And now you have, and even though, even now we hear about one really superstar leader. Dallas this year had a single lead leader. He's not the only one in the team, but the standout leader for Dallas is going to be Prophet. That's who you're going to hear about. He led for a lot of the race by himself. He likes running by himself, Dallas says. So as long as you do your job, you'll get to run by yourself.
Yes.
So we do have that, but they don't run the full race. And I don't even know that Swenson or Butcher ran their star lead dog single all the time.
Yeah, that's one tough dog. If they can do 900 miles on their own and continue to do their job, that's a really big deal. So while we're on the dogs, before we talk about the rest of the field, at the finish, you will often see two dogs, and we've talked about those double leaders, there with the winner, and they put the ring of roses around them, and they have a special award called the Golden Harness. Who are those dogs, if you know, with Brent, and why is that such a special honor? Of course, we know the answer, but what are your thoughts on it?
Sure. So it's actually two awards. There's the yellow roses that they put around the dogs, the two dogs now that the musher gets to choose. Typically, it's the lead dogs, and they typically choose those two lead dogs to lead them into Nome. So for Brent, it was Slater, and I believe the other dog's name is Morello. I've seen some comments saying that the name is being mispronounced, but I don't know. So I'm just going by what I heard on the television early this morning when I was half awake. So I apologize to the dog if I have butchered his name. And that is chosen by the musher. The Golden Harness Award is traditionally voted on by the other mushers. And in most recent years, it's always the same dog, at least one of the dogs that the champion musher has chosen. I think Dallas Stevie had Reese. It was Tanner for Mitch, and I think Pilot for Mitch. And then I want to remember yours dog's name because it was so cool, and now I can't remember it off the top of my head. But back in the day, it wasn't necessarily the Iditarod Champions dog that got the Golden Harness Award. There were many years, especially when Susan Butcher was running and winning, that her dog Granite was not winning, even though he was the star athlete. He was not winning. It was somebody else, somebody else's lead dog or somebody else's awesome dog that won the Golden Harness, which I'm sure, there was an argument for that, but you don't see that typically now. It's more typically the lead dog of the champion musher that wins that award.
Yeah, very similar to the Super Bowl. Often you will always have the MVP, and it's typically the quarterback or the wide receiver on the winning team that wins that. But on a very rare occasion, would you have somebody from a different team? I'm thinking there's one in recent memory with that. I could be wrong, but if I am, let me know on Twitter. Tell me who it is or who it wasn't, and then we'll continue on with that. So let's talk a little bit about the rest of the field. We currently have 44 mushers either on the trail or the two that have finished. Lisbeth Norris is in the Red Lantern position. I want to mention her in just a second. Followed by Apayuk, Kaylin, Yuka, Eric Kelly, and Katie Joe and Jeff Dieter. And I mentioned both of those guys because it looks like they're traveling pretty close together. They were about 25 minutes apart at the last refresh that I did. And it looks like, as we mentioned early on in the race, and we may have mentioned this on our picks when we said Hannah Lyric is going to take the Rookie of the Year award, and that's almost always, again, I can't think of a time when it wasn't, the first rookie into Nome, and she is currently in 19th place, and the next rookie is in 24th place in Koyuk, and she is either in or out of Elam. So I guess it's possible that Martin could pass her up, but I think she has it pretty locked down. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I know she was having some concern about this part of the trail, especially going over from Shaktoolik to Koyuk yesterday. Paige Drobny said in an interview this morning that she actually ran with Hannah because Hannah was concerned that if she got lost, what happens if, her team runs into the ocean, which is totally understandable because that is the scariest part of this whole race for me is the Norton Sound and knowing that there's just a lip and then water. So, it's far enough away from the trail, but I can understand in those winds that they were running in being concerned. So Paige ran with her across the Norton Sound. But it looks like she's recovered from that nicely. And she's well on her way to being quote unquote in the money in her rookie year. And especially with the way that this race has gone, that's nothing to be ashamed about. Her 19th place is a huge accomplishment for a rookie.
It is. And Toni, we talked earlier in our coverage about running over on time. In the last few days, we've really run over, but we have an okay from two of our Twitter followers. They said, hey, I don't care if you go over every time. So at least on YouTube, they're listening to the very end. So I think that's pretty cool because obviously we're going to give folks a warning right now that we're going to go over. Let's talk a little bit about Lisbeth Norris. For a long time, there was a group of mushers at the back sort of doing the race together. And then sort of one by one, all of those guys pulled away. And Lisbeth is now firmly in last place and pretty far back from the next musher up. What do you know about her, and how is she doing out there on the trail?
Sure. So earlier, I think even before Iditarod started, she had mentioned on Facebook that the team was not as trained up as she would have liked them to be starting on this race. She is running a team of full-blood Siberians, so they are good for long hauls. But I can imagine that the slog fest that was the first third of the race probably did take a little bit of its toll, especially if the dogs weren't as trained up as they needed to be for something like that, breaking trail and whatnot. We do know that Lisbeth was one of those mushers in the back of the pack that had to go through the blizzard. So it looks like that might be part of the problem. Her speeds are a little bit slow. I've noticed that when we get reports on Facebook, on her Facebook page about the dogs that have been returned to Anchorage, they're going mainly because they're tired, which to me kind of sounds more like they just weren't ready for maybe going the full distance. That doesn't mean that her whole team isn't ready, but certain dogs weren't trained up for that. I would caution and wonder if she isn't going to be a musher that the race decides to withdraw because she is so far back behind everybody else. She chose to take her 8 in Caltag. So she's even further back than Apayuk and Kaylin are. Apayuk was still in Caltag, I think, when Lisbeth was running very close to getting into there, and everyone was like, well, she's running with Apayuk, so that she'll be fine. but you have to take in consideration she's got 8 hours that she has to rest. I don't know when exactly a Payak left, but I'm pretty sure she was on the trail well before Lisbeth got well into her resting. So that's a lot of miles to cover. I'm looking at the GPS right now, and it's about a 40-mile difference right now, and that's only going to grow as a Payak and Kaylin continue on down the trail as Lisbeth continues to rest.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see her withdrawn by tomorrow.
And it looks like the mushers in front of her are averaging about 10 miles an hour, and she's averaging about 8.5 miles an hour. So at 8.5 miles an hour for 40 miles, that's well over a 6-hour gap between her and the next musher there. So it's quite a bit of difference. And you had mentioned not only does she have to do that 8 hours in Caltech, but also has to do the 8 hours in White Mountain that all mushers have to do. So at the very least, she's 16 hours further back than the finishers are right now. Then as the race rolls on, we've talked about the machine. As that rolls on, the more hours that are tacked onto the back, the easier it is to make that hard decision with Lisbeth. And one final thing on a team that's not trained up. We're going to talk here in a little bit about our musher profile of the day, Matt Paviglio, and he had talked about his dogs and where they were ready for Iditarod before he started, and he made a comment on Facebook that his dogs had about 2,500 miles on them this year, training miles. And of course, he did a couple of shorter races, but that just gives people a perspective on how many miles of training that it takes to get a dog team that's ready. And while he is not necessarily blazing the trail, he's solidly in sort of that middle to the back of the pack spot. He's currently in 33rd place. Not a bad spot to be in as a rookie, but that is really the difference between those 11 spots about a team that's really trained up with 2,500 odd miles compared to, I don't know what Lisbeth has, but that was what she had mentioned. So we'll see how those guys work out and then carry on. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the purse and the sponsors. The sponsor story has been one that's a story every year, and we could really go off the rails with that and probably cover a whole episode with it. But I noticed, and I saw it on Facebook, and I do have to wear glasses now, Toni, so maybe my eyes were deceiving me, but it looked like the supersized check was only $50,000 this year, and more importantly, no truck. So what do you know about that?
Well, the no truck thing happened a couple of years ago, and that was due to a number of things. The Anchorage Chrysler Dodge, who used to donate the truck every year, were huge supporters and sponsors of Iditarod. The original owner passed away, and as long as he was in charge, he fought tooth and nail to be able to be a part of the last great race. They are a franchise. Now, when he passed, it's my understanding that Chrysler Dodge, the big corporation, they gave an ultimatum saying, if you want to continue in this franchise, you have to give up that sponsorship. A lot of it came down to they were having their different car shows and offices down in lower 48 were getting vandalized and picketed by a certain group with 3 or 4 letters. Sorry, I can't count today. 4 letters in their name. And it was like Chrysler's not even the one donating. It's a local franchise. So that's why there's no truck anymore. It's really disappointing. I was kind of hoping that Kendall Ford might step up and replace that, considering they sponsor Martin Boozer. I thought that would be a really nice segue into getting in win with Iditarod, but I haven't seen that yet. And then this last year, we've seen quite a bit of change in principal sponsors. So, which I'm sure you're wanting to talk about, but I don't know where this conversation is going exactly.
Yeah, just a quick thought on the truck. I read a story right before Iditarod, and as you mentioned, the owner of that dealership passed away, and he was a real flashy guy, had commercials on, and just your typical no nonsense type car commercial that everybody in the country has seen. But when he passed away, like you said, there were some big changes there, and I think the story said that even in its heyday, their marketing with the truck giveaway, it wasn't the $50,000 or $60,000 truck that was the big deal. They were using that sponsorship as a way to garner interest for that dealership all year long, because it would be the Iditarod, the sponsor of the Iditarod and all of that. So they would sell literally millions of dollars of cars every year. And of course, they gave one away for Iditarod. And of course, whoever was the Iditarod winner, they would make commercials with, so on and so forth. But that sadly ended. But this is interesting in that itself, that there are so many sponsors that have left in the last couple of years. In particular, some of the big ones like Coca-Cola and I know I'm going a few years back, but Jack Daniels and the recent notification of the Lakefront Hotel, which used to be called the Millennium, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of pressure from outside groups, and they really take notice of that. But also there are, of course, lots of little sponsors that have been around forever. A lot of Alaska-based sponsors are still around. And then there's a couple of bigger sponsors that came on this year. One of the energy companies, Hillcorp, I believe. I don't know if they're only oil or not. And then another big one is Donlin Gold, which is a mining company up here. They've always been a big supporter. And then, of course, the airlines and whatnot have been big supporters as well. So with the truck being gone, are they no longer giving away a truck at the fair like they've done for so many years as well?
They haven't been. That raffle is now more of a money raffle than a prize raffle, is my understanding. I haven't looked recently, but that first year that they no longer had the truck, it became just a money raffle. I think the one that they're doing this winter, and I shouldn't actually speak on this until I look, but I think there are other prizes that they're bringing into the raffle now. But yeah, no, we've lost some really big sponsors. ExxonMobil was a big one. They dropped out, I think, last year. And I can remember when Cabela's and Timberland were big sponsors. They were on all the banners, and I find it really ironic, especially Cabela's, that they caved to pressure from animal rights activists when they're literally a sporting goods store that sells hunting and fishing equipment. So
yeah.
I some of it, it's like, I think they just use it as an excuse because they want to support other things, like Alaska Airlines. They were really upfront. They're like, look, this is not because of pressure. This is just because we want to go in a different direction. And they still sponsor, I think the Junior Iditarod still has Alaska Airlines support. The Kuskokwim 300 still has. So it's not like they're anti-mushing. It's just there are other things, I think, involved that maybe we as the spectators and fans don't know about, that has given some sort of lack of confidence maybe in sponsoring the last great race, which I think is really sad. But I'm very thankful for, Northrim Bank, Hillcorp, like you said, coming in and really filling that gap. And like I said, I think Kendall Ford or one of the other local dealerships could really make bank by donating that truck again. So I think Iditarod's in a good direction by going and finding other sponsors, that they don't have to necessarily just wallow in what we've lost.
Yeah, I would love to see the truck come back. I know that Kendall is also a nationwide company now, so I don't know where that pressure stands with that. But hey, I'm sure there's a lot of smaller dealerships that could definitely offer that. So that leads us into our next sort of topic. And I know that we're covering lots of stuff, but it's interesting because we're going to be one of the very few people that are still talking about the race after tomorrow, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the end. So I want to talk a little bit about what Rob Urbach, he is the CEO of Iditarod, said right before the race, sort of that preseason talk that he did. And he's really wanting to push the race into a different direction, and that's why he was brought on board. He is sort of a sports marketing guy. He's been, that's in his blood. He's been a part of that for his entire career, and there was a real changing of the guard after some very interesting incidents that we've already talked about in our coverage this year. But when Rob came on, and if you guys are really interested in what Rob has to say, we have a 2-part series that Alex did with Rob. I think it was last year, maybe even the year before, and it's in our feed. But he said before the race that there's going to be some big changes, and it's really setting them up for the future. And one of the cool things that they're doing is they're going to jump into the cryptocurrency game and offer some type of cryptocurrency for Iditarod fans or sponsors or whomever. They're going to do that. They're envisioning starting a 24-hour dog channel similar to the one that's on satellite. I know we have it. I think it's called Dogs TV on DirecTV, but they're planning on doing something like that. So it becomes a year-long thing. But it's not just Iditarod or sled dog stuff. They recently bought the sport Doc Dogs, and they are the owner of that organization, franchise, whatever it is. And Doc Dogs is entirely different than sled dogs. It's pretty much a dog runs down a ramp, is chasing after a ball, and they jump into a pool, and they figure out how far they can jump. So it's sort of like the long jump in Olympics with a pool and often retriever type dogs that are chasing after a pool. So they have that under their belt now. And they're also thinking about doing, of course, some different types of coverages. We talked about that with the krill pets. And I'm probably missing other things, but that's sort of the direction that Rob wants to go. What are your thoughts on that as a fan and sort of the future of the sport?
Yeah, when Rob came on, I was really excited. It was, like you said, new blood, new energy. There wasn't going to be this idea of, well, this is how we've always done it, so we're just going to do it this way. And, who cares if we're not in the 21st century or whatever. That was kind of the attitude that a lot of people felt. I'm one of those, I hate change personally most of the time. So even though I was really excited about Rob, every new thing that they come up with, I'm like, I don't like it. I just don't like it. Some of them have done really well. Others, I know this year it's been a big talk among fans and volunteers that they're starting to feel like they're not understanding their Iditarod audience, the one that's been here for 40 years. Or 50 years in some cases. They feel like they're being pushed out. A lot of that was talk about the merchandise. It's gone up exponentially, and I know some of that is just supply and demand and capitalism and blah, blah, blah. But, when you have a little, keychain dog that just last year cost maybe $5 and now it's $13, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I know a lot of people, they come up, they want their yearly T-shirt, their hat, their mug, and that's what they get. And now it's like, well, I can have a T-shirt for $50 instead of the $20 that it used to be before. I feel like they're pricing out their core audience that has always been here before they have started to truly grow the sport. And I'm probably going to be in trouble for even complaining about this. But that's just kind of the knee-jerk reaction, first round kind of look. But they are getting more high-end looking clothing and merchandise. And so that is going to have a bigger price tag. But at the same time, look around you. Your mushers, the spirit of the race was not NASCAR. As much as we love seeing the NASCAR part of it, and yes, put the sponsorships out there, get money into the races. You still want to have the Brent Sasses who, okay, he does have sponsors. I'm not going to play that game that they were playing all night where, he's the real Musher and he lives out in the middle of nowhere and he doesn't have all of this glitz and glam that the other. He has sponsors too. Let's not be so naive. But he still gives kind of that vibe of he just lives out in the woods and he lives with his dogs and then he comes and runs races and wins. It feels like they're wanting to go more NASCAR, which is fine, but I think that kind of loses the spirit of what we've been celebrating all year with the Joe Reddingtons and the Dick Mackeys and the Rod Perrys and the Bud Smiths and all of that. So I kind of hesitate. The whole Bitcoin thing, I still don't understand it. It sounds like new math to me, and I can barely understand the old math. So I'm not really sure why that's even something that they're like gung-ho about when you've got to get sponsorships for this race. I don't think Bitcoin's going to be the answer, especially since a lot of people are like me. We don't get it. But I really am interested in this streaming channel app that's going to be a dog sports network, is what it sounded like when he announced it at the ITC member Zoom back last fall. He was really, really gung-ho about that. Now, my understanding was it was supposed to be up and running by the time Iditarod 50th happened. So I'm sure, biting off more than he can chew to get it out that soon. But it's really exciting because they want to have dog training. They want to have dog sports, dog-centered topics and programming. So I think that's really exciting. I think that's a great way to introduce new fans to the sport because who doesn't want to watch dogs all day? So I think there's some good in it. I really like Rob's energy. I like that he has got people on board with his new ideas much more so than I expected him to. I just don't know where they're going, what audience they're trying to get.
One of my thoughts on that, and then, of course, if you have a rebuttal, we can definitely go. Otherwise, we can move on. When you talked about the Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency, of course, that is definitely looking for that newer demographic. And just a little bit of personal information. Just yesterday, Toni, our business, Dogworks Training Company, decided to jump into the future and offer dog training where they can pay by cryptocurrency. And interestingly enough, you wonder about new math. And I opened up an account, and Michelle, my wife, is sitting right here with me, and she doesn't even know this yet. But I invested $300 into Bitcoin.
$300.
Yes, here. and so I invested.
I thought it was $30.
I invested $300 into Bitcoin yesterday. Guess where it's at right now? $309.
But those numbers mean anything.
Hold on. It is $395 right before we went on to air. So
Okay, pull it out now.
So anyway, so I don't know what the future holds for our company or for Iditarod, but maybe and I guess my closing thought to that is whether they pay out the purse in Bitcoin or whatever they do. But I think that when they're struggling with a $50,000 purse like they are this year, and that's the lowest that I can remember in a while, that is, and I know it's sponsorship, I know it's COVID, I know it's a whole bunch of things of why it is so low, but that seems like a really low purse compared to how it has been in years past, especially if we talk about inflation. Just today it cost $100 to fill up my dog truck with gas, and $100 is $100. So, this is my thoughts. Do you have a rebuttal to it?
I just think that Bitcoin is for people named Robert. Because you guys are both so gung-ho.
both of us are named Robert. So let me ask our fans, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency, whether it's for Iditarod or not? Have you ventured into that game yet? If you have or haven't, let us know on our social channels. You can search Dogworks Radio and hashtag Iditarod50 or whatever you like. Let us know what your thoughts are about the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency game, if it's a good idea for Iditarod or a bad idea. We would love to hear what you have to say, for sure. So, Toni, do we have anything else before we jump into our Musher Profile of the evening?
I just got another thought about this Bitcoin, and it's going to be short, but it feels like when Brent got the first to the halfway point, it was either last year or the year before, and GCI gave him the option. He could have gold nuggets or he could have a brand new iPhone. And he looked right at them and said, I don't get cell service where I live. I'll take the gold nuggets. And I feel like that's Bitcoin with Iditarod.
Yes. And it's a good thing that he did not take the iPhone. And we could talk about that in another episode, because he has a history with Apple products that goes way back. So let's talk about our Musher Profile of the evening. His name is Matt Paviglio. I have known Matt for several years. He was on the board with me at the Chugiak Dog Mushers Association, which is primarily a sprint club, but we do a lot of things here in the local community, including the Eagle River Classic and races like that. He was a board member up until this year when he decided to run Iditarod, and this really kicked off last year, maybe year before or so. His mom was dealing with a real bad bout of cancer, and I think she's passed away now. But he reached out to Kathleen Frederick, whose husband was suffering and is still suffering from a form of cancer, and they started pretty much an instant bond. And before long, Matt and Kathy decided to team up together, and she loaned him his dog team to run in this year's race. He's a rookie. And this is not like your typical Lisa team type situation where, people come in for the lower 48, they have $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, they hook up with a very established kennel, and they pay their money, and hopefully that money takes them to Nome. That is not the case here with Matt. He, as we said earlier, he's worked really hard to get to the starting line. 2,500 miles in training is a heck of a lot of miles. He also is running his races this year with his daughter. His daughter ran a junior Iditarod as well with Kathleen Frederick's dogs, and they are making their name in the sport for sure. Just a little bit of a personal note on Matt. He is one of the most hyperactive, friendly type guys I've ever been around. And I remember one year he was at our Easter race here in Chugiak, and this is just a fun family event where you carry Easter eggs in your sled around 3 or 4 miles, and everybody plays dress up and the whole 9 yards. And he and his friend Josh came out in hula skirts and bikini tops and leis and did the whole 9 yards. And it was refreshing to see his energy there as well as in the sport. And I wanted to profile him because this is the type of guy that we need in the race, I think. We have those grizzled veterans who kind of keep their head down and, do the race and are perfectly content if they never look at Facebook and, just kind of ho-hum. And then you have a group of mushers that embrace it. And of course, many mushers have taken that route, especially with just the plethora of social media these days. But Matt is one of those guys that really does that. He's from Michigan, and he's been up here in Alaska for a while. And I know a little while ago in our coverage, we talked about the professionals that run races like this. We talked about doctors and lawyers. He is an emergency room nurse, and he's been in that role for many years. And of course, he chronicled his struggles with, being a frontline worker during COVID and all of that, and he's always been just kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, and that's sort of my thought on his run. And just a quick note. I've looked at all of these bios since we've been doing this year, and often you will have sponsors, 2 or 3 sponsors for each person that we've talked about. And I'm looking at his right now, and of course, a lot of them are individuals, but he has half of a page of sponsors.
Yeah.
So
I noticed that too.
yeah, so people really like Matt, and that's my thought on him. What are your thoughts on Matt Paviglio?
Well, I have to agree with the sponsors. A lot of the time when mushers have a lot of mini sponsors or micro sponsors, I think is the term that the Ugly Dogs use. They normally say, like when Blair ran, it was, and a lot of ugly dogs, because otherwise you're going to be here for 3 years reading my bio with all of my sponsors. And so you do see that a lot. But with Matt, he named, I'm pretty sure, every one of them. And that was just kind of fun to see, kind of thankful that the Mushers Banquet went a little differently this year, because otherwise I think Matt would still be on the stage thanking all of his sponsors. And we would have never started the race. But he, when he came through the ceremonial start, in the days before, actually, he was talking about how excited he was. And I like to be annoying and warn the mushers over and over. Look, when you get to the Native Medical Center, there's that really sharp corner that you don't think is going to take you out, and it takes out a number of mushers every year. And so I was giving Matt a hard time about that on Facebook, and he replied back, he's like, I've run the Rondi, it's fine. And so I was kind of secretly hoping that he jinxed himself and that he'd be one of the teams that missed it, just so I could be like, I told you so. But he didn't. He made it clean through like a champ. But on that corner was the entire fan base, I swear, of Matt. They built snowmen that held Go Matt signs. One said Team Determined for his mom. There were signs littered all over the trail on both sides. And as we waited for him to come through, this big group, they had snowball fights. They just had this big party. And I think that that's a culture that obviously he has cultivated around himself. Like you said, he's a very upbeat, encouraging person. I've never had the privilege of meeting him in person, but I've talked with him over social media for the last few years. And I find him very positive and encouraging. And I'm really excited to see him finish the race. It looks like he's not going to have a problem doing that. It's just sorry, if you can hear that, that's my dog making random noises at me. But he's a really, really good face for the rookies, and I think for the sport in general. So yeah, no, Matt's a great one to feature here as our musher of the day.
Yeah, and I, like I said, and you just sort of mirrored that. I think that this is sort of the future of Iditarod, especially as we move into that, sort of second or third decade now of social media with the race, because these micro type sponsors, as you mentioned, those are the ones that make up the bulk of Iditarod team sponsors. It's the dog sponsorships and these folks that donate, $50 or $100, and $60 buys a bag of dog food. And if you can get a bunch of sponsors to help you just in those micro ways, it can really go a long way. And of course, we could definitely spend an episode or two about the expenses of running Iditarod. But I think that this is sort of the new way of doing it. Of course, the Ugly Dogs are on an entirely different level with this type of sponsorship and support. But I think it's with people like Matt where we'll see the real strides with the coverage of the race, at least on an individual kennel level. I know that there's a lot of mushers out there that do an exceptional job. where they cover it exceptionally well. Lev Schwartz, his wife, is one that you should definitely follow, in particular on Facebook if you want some real coverage of what's happening over their homestead. But this sort of is, at least in my eyes, the future of the sport. And I think the more folks that we have like Matt is definitely going to help us out. I don't know if it's going to go to the level that Rob Urbach wants, but it's definitely refreshing to see.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And, even some of the old dogs, they have learned the tricks. You see Jeff King, he's very active on social media, not necessarily with kennel stuff, but just personal stuff. And then you have Mitch Seavey, who I think does a phenomenal job on his personal page, or fan page, I should say, of keeping people updated year long about what his mushing experience is. Sometimes he's telling old time stories, sometimes he's showing training videos. But a lot of, I'm still shocked. It's been a few years now, but I'm still shocked that they got him on social media, much less have him working it fluently.
Yeah, for years he was sort of a distance from it. He didn't do anything, and I remember those first few posts that he did, and I think he had something like his first and middle and last name as his. Maybe he still does for his. For his profile. It wasn't Mitch Seavey. It was whatever, Mitchell John Seavey or whatever his name is. So I thought that was cool. But, old timer on social media, as you mentioned, Jeff definitely embraces it. And Jeff definitely doesn't go as in deep as some of these, obviously these younger pups, as we say on social media. But interestingly enough, a lot of these guys don't keep it up all year either, and I think that that's probably something that they should do. You'll hear a lot of them in January, February, March, and then you don't hear anything from them until Christmas time. And I think in terms of social media, you have to stick it out all year. And I know it's a pain to do, and being on there and constantly updating and being positive and the whole 9 yards is tough to do. Again, that's definitely a full episode that we could carry on throughout talking about social media. So we are almost at an hour. Maybe even our YouTube guys have dropped off by now, but we have a couple of other things we want to do. As I mentioned earlier in this coverage, we're going to be one of the very few people that are still talking about this all the way through the banquet. I know a lot of the media outlets, especially the big boys, will move on. They have other stories to cover. We're thinking about the local news and that sort of stuff. They'll do some updates, but that will not be as in depth as it has been over the last week and a half. There are only a couple of people that stick around and still talk about it every night like we do. So I encourage you guys to stick around. We still have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of our coverage, and I'm sure Toni will be absolutely sick of us by then, and she'll be ready to hang up her podcasting headphones at that point and not want to do anything until next year, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And then lastly, we asked for you guys to review our show a couple of nights ago, and we would like to ask that again. You can do that on any Facebook or any podcast app that you're on, whether it's on Apple or iHeart or Podchaser or any of those. We would love to hear your review, positive or negative. Tell us what we can do better. I know a couple of years ago we were talking about one particular musher, and the fan did not agree with us and gave us a really heartfelt review on what he thought about us. And we talked about that, Alex and I. I don't know if were you on that year or not, Toni. But we
think so.
Yeah, we talked about it, and we even brought it up and gave our rebuttal to the review. And for good, bad, or worse, we answered his questions on why we do what we do. So good or bad, leave a review. It's always helpful. It helps other people find our shows. And lastly, when you hit that subscribe button, you will get a instant download from on your device, and I'm sure most people listen to us on their iPhones or Androids or whatever pocket phone they have in their pocket. That's where they're listening. Most people don't sit at their computer and listen to two people ramble on for an hour, but they could. They could very well be sitting there with their...
That's how I listen to podcasts.
On your computer?
Yes.
While you're at work.
At work.
Yes. I listen to all my podcasts in the car, so if it's longer than an hour, and we're running up there, if you're longer than an hour, you probably won't finish at least then. So with all that, Toni, we will be back on tomorrow night. Did we miss anything now that we have a winner?
Nope, but Jesse Holmes just came into Nome a little bit ago, and I'm sure Dan Canuth, if he is not in, will be in the next few minutes. So we've got the first 4 into the finish.
And he still has all 14 dogs. That's an impressive feat on its own for him to finish with a full string of dogs. I know when they did the 16 to 14 was a little bit different, but it has not happened very often to be able to finish with all of your dogs, and that's a big accomplishment. That is a true testament to dog care and dogs wanting to go and all of that other stuff we talked about at the beginning. All right, guys, I appreciate you being on tonight. Toni, we will talk to you tomorrow, and on behalf of my co-host, this is the DogWorks radio show and Mushing Radio. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio.
So earlier, you learned about First Paw Coffee Company. Now I'm going to tell you about its Trailbreaker Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Trailbreaker Blend is inspired by our love of the Northern Lights, frosty paws, and sled dog trails. How cool is that? The Trailbreaker Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It's a medium dark roast from Central and South America, highlighting flavors of brown sugar, hazelnut, and plum. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.